Town of Washington Historical Society meeting on September 20th in the year 2001, and the meeting tonight is being held at the Village Hall on Merritt Avenue in Millbrook, and the topic of our discussion tonight is an open house at the Village Hall to celebrate its 87th year of community recreation.
Our point of having this get-together tonight is to talk a little bit about the history of this wonderful building. It's the old Y building, the community center, as well as some of the history of athletics and recreation in general within the town of Washington. Before we get going, though, I do think it's proper, after the circumstances of last week, that we do take a moment of silence to think about those folks who were involved in the tragedy. Everybody. Let me tell you about what we're going to do tonight. First, we have plenty of refreshments. Please help yourself and feel free to get up, and we have the coffee is finally done and done brewing. What we're going to do tonight is talk a little bit. I'm going to hand it over to Ginny Augerson, who's the president of the Town of Washington Historical Society. The Historical Society runs monthly programs, as many of you know, on different aspects of the history of this wonderful town. And tonight they have decided with the Recreation Commission to sponsor it about the community center. I want to introduce some of the important people here, especially on our Recreation Commission. Bill Zmedowski, Warren McMillan, and Bob Rizzo are all in the back. They're members of our Recreation Commission, which is a function, kind of a derivative of the history from Community Center to Recreation Commission that happened in 1981. At this time, what I'd like to do is hand it over to Ginny. She's going to talk about a lot of the early history from the beginning of this building in 1914 up to about 1940. Then I'll come back and talk a little bit. I'm going to go backwards in history from currently what's going on, a little bit backwards. And I'd like to share then everybody's thoughts and stories about this building, to try to piece some things together. And I'm going to be taking a lot of notes because I think there are some gaps in the history that I'd like to get down. So, without any further ado, I'd like to hand it over to Ginny.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This is a wonderful building to have you have us all over here. It brings back memories to me because I went to high school and used to play, as I mentioned, basketball, not very well, in the other room. And I'm sure many of you also have memories of earlier days, so it's great to be back here. And I do want to thank the people who gave us pictures to use. Nancy Spagnola, and I know Helen Dolan brought in a bunch. They're over there, and well, there's quite a bit of information. I'm going to ask that if each of you, when you're going through things in your house, you have to know something from the old Y or the community center from the 1930s, don't toss it. Give it to David or give it to me, and we'll find a place. I see David's already been keeping wonderful scrapbooks, and that's what we need. Before I go any further, our group has a couple short announcements to make. Jean Armstrong?
I am so excited because for the last 3 years of my life, I've been stuck at the computer with these wonderful stories by Louise Tompkins. And we sent the book of Louise Tompkins stories to the publishers yesterday. In 3 weeks, they tell us it'll be a real book, and it's 290 pages, 50 pages of pictures. I learned so much about Millbrook because, you know, I'm a transplant. And I love Louise Tompkins. She's great. You had a gem here, didn't you? So, the November meeting will be about Louise Tompkins. And we'll be selling the book. We haven't decided how much we're going to sell it for, but we'll make it very reasonable as we can. We want to update her gravestone. And it would probably make a really great Christmas present. So we'll see you in November.
Did Alice Meyer have to leave? Mrs. Myers, working on the program committee, asked me to announce tonight that next month's meeting we'll have an archivist. She's an archivist for 5 counties in this area, Erica Blumenfeld. And she's going to talk to us about what to do and how to save our old photographs, documents, Bible, and things. Would like us to bring in a sample of something we have that we're wondering about. Maybe it's getting mold spots or something that we would like to save, an old wedding certificate. And she'll have ideas to give us. And that will be next month. The flyers will be going out.
I think it's the 16th
16th, Tuesday instead of
at
Thursday.
the Federated Church.
Federated Church, yeah. When David and Paul Hurley first talked about having a meeting together about this building and about community services that came out of this building, I was immediately interested because our grandfather had taken a lot of pictures, but one of them he had, the old glass one, is a picture of this clock. One of them there is on a building on E. Birch's department store. Didn't give a date, it just said YMCA, building campaign, $40,000 by October 14th. Millbrook should keep time with other communities. Well, this piqued my interest, no date on it, so I didn't know. But when I started looking at the Historical Society items, I found amongst everything a YMCA, Millbrook, New York, Secretary's Notebook. And it goes from 1914 to 1929. And when I opened it up, I saw some familiar looking handwriting. It turned out my grandfather was secretary for it. So that also made me interested. In the front of it, it's a letter from George T. Whalen Jr. that was written to Louise Tompkins, who at that time, I think she was still town historian in 1976. Jean, you know the days better than I do. Dear Louise, the attached book was recently given to me by a person who found it in a home here in Millbrook. I looked through it and found it rather interesting and thought that you might enjoy having it. Best wishes for happy holiday season. George T. Whalen Jr. I'm looking for descendants tonight. Now, was this your grandfather or great uncle? Or
Yes, my
your grandfather. And then, in 1978, down at the bottom was written, donated in memory of George T. Whalen to the Town of Washington Historical Society for their archives. That's in Sally Gifford O'Brien's writing for Louise Tompkins. So Louise Tompkins passed this wonderful gift on to the Historical Society. And amongst the minutes are one list after another from 1914, all the early members. So if you wonder whether your grandparents ever belonged, you can look through there and get an idea. The 1914 and 1913 dates that have been used in the past aren't really right. And I had noticed looking for other things in old newspapers that the YMCA was around earlier. So I started looking seriously, and I'm going to run through this just by dates and try to move along quickly. Because in February 1910, there was an interesting letter in the newspaper of Reverend Gilbert of Grace Church. He said he was very disappointed. Grace Church was building their parish house, already been planned with other members of the community, that this would be a base for the YMCA. It would be non-denominational, bowling alley, and this would be a base for the YMCA they were hoping to build. But the county YMCA said no to this. I suppose this idea of having it in the church, they said no. And 3 months later, after 2 more meetings, the town got together again and decided that they wanted to have the YMCA here to provide clean and wholesome entertainment. And besides, they thought they could get together 2 baseball teams. All through the years, I think the baseball teams were the biggest interest with the men in the community. And they picked, this time the county person came out, and he picked 2 members from each church. I'm going to read their names, because I want to find out if there are any descendants. The Dutch Reformed Church, they chose Dr. David Mackenzie. Now his picture is over here. He's from the newspaper, and I know we have a descendant here tonight because I invited him to come. That's Gordon Mackenzie. Would you stand up? Some people are going to remember you.
That's my grandfather.
Gordon was passing through town. Now I'm going to make a little detour because I've always been interested in the Mackenzie name because although we just had a little difference on time, your grandparents and my grandparents knew each other well. They traveled to Niagara Falls together. Your grandfather, if not taking care of my great-great-grandfather, took care of my great-grandfather when he was dying in the early 1900s. And we have a picture I think I brought it with me, of your uncle, great uncle Hugh in ringlets that was given
Put it in Gordon. It's up on my father.
on the back. It says Hugh Mackenzie.
Okay, that's good.
And handwriting isn't my grandfather's, but it was a portrait of Dr. Given to my grandfather in the days when everyone exchanged portraits. Well, moving along, the next person is Harry Downey. Are there any Downey descendants left in town at all, and anybody knows that? No. St. Joseph Church, they chose Thomas Dean. Any Dean descendants? Everyone's P.H. Keever.
Keever? Patsy Keever?
P.H. Keever.
Keeps the shop down on the corner of, right across from the garage.
The burned up ones.
And then he moved to a little one just below, just back of it. A little shop where he sold penny candy.
And you knew him. He was still
Oh, yeah.
around when you were growing up.
Oh, yeah.
Loves it.
Yeah, the candy store, of course.
He was a star, Patsy Keever.
Okay. No descendants, though. How about James Reardon? He was in the Grace Church. James Reardon was picked. And Dr. DeGarris, who was a dentist. Does anyone remember him? Did he remember? From the Friends Church, which was still here then, was B.J. Pisey. And we know he had the store, the plumbing and the
He had a
tinsmith.
plumbing shop downtown, and he lived up on the corner across from the high school.
Did he?
Yeah, you're talking about the Garris. The Garris used to have the gift shop, which is now TOWNH.
Really?
Yeah.
That's the daughter. Daughter.
Was the daughter, what had it?
Well, there was Bunny DeGarris that was married to Mrs. DeGarris,
And then we have a Samuel Maston. Any descendants?
Ginny, there's a Pisey still living. Her name is Doris Bundy. She's in the Church Alliance.
The Church Alliance. I'll have to get in touch with her so we can get a little history. And the Methodist Church had A. Cunningham. I think there's probably Albert, who would be the father of Earl. And many of us know Earl Cunningham as the policeman who was usually at church.
Yes.
Dick Tracy.
Church in Franklin.
We call him Dick Tracy.
Dick Tracy.
Some is doing better than others.
I'm going to mention him again in a moment. And I don't think there are any Cunninghams around. George Smith, well, there are lots of Smiths. W.C. Russell was put in charge of the baseball players.
Yeah, that was
Is that James?
my husband's grandfather, William.
Well, he was put in charge of the baseball teams. They decided that they were only going to have local players. They weren't going to hire anyone because, well, a team cannot be developed by sitting under the trees and seeing hired players do the work. And so, you know, the teams are only going to be as good as the local kids were. And I think they turned out pretty well. It was just about that time that they got the grounds in the back of the primary school turned over to them. And they had to raise some $3,500 just to fix those up. They were going to put in right then the tennis courts and the diamond and croquet court.
And that's, Jenny, if I can interrupt, that painting up there is a painting of the old baseball field area in the back before the Y field. There's a lot of it. 1950, I think, that painting.
Is this Al?
That's
Al
Al.
Dragon
Yeah.
Interesting part about that picture. See that little cupola there? Back when I first started as a store, back in 1947, I was selling soda at that stand, and I remember the guy painting that picture. And I was just on that cupola there with a little old
The gazebo?
Coca-Cola stand, you know, ice and selling knee-high soda for a nickel.
Well, Mr. Russell didn't get the team started very fast because the first carnival they had was called the Grand Athletic Carnival under the auspices of the Millbrook Young Men's Christian Association, July 4, 1910. A couple of teams, they were made-up teams, pickup teams. Two of them were called the Fats and the Leans won. The other two were the Dubes and the Rubes. And the uniform of the Dubes will consist of white flannel trousers, pea green silk shirts, white silk ties, Panama hats of highest grade, white Morocco shoes, and silk socks of the same shade as the shirts. The Rubes will wear blue-brown striped overalls cowhide boots, a hickory shirt, a billy goat beard, and where did you get that hat? So it sounds like, there's a big write-up here, it sounds like they had a lot of fun at that, because they mentioned Ludwig Gross, so I'm assuming it was Bucky Gross's father.
Right.
It mentions that he had to take the place of one of the fats. Ludwig qualified for the place by stuffing some hay under his vest. They have carnival the next year, and I have Kevin DeMartine. I guess it's over on my other thing. There's a in color program, and Kevin DeMartine let me borrow it and scan it on my scanner, so I'd have a copy of that, a colorful program they put out, and that's another thing we'd like to collect. If you come across any old programs with this, we'd certainly like to collect those. Now, in 1912, they did have their first good baseball team, and the YMCA beat Stanfordville 24-4. Their pitcher was Earl Cunningham, and I read about it in a couple of other write-ups, and he was a great pitcher, long before he became Dick Tracy. The umpire was Jerry Donahue, Catherine Donahue's father, who's one of our old-timers. She's not out tonight. I did check with her to see if he had belonged to the YMCA. She said he didn't, but he obviously pitched in by being the umpire. I don't know if umpires can help you win a game or not, but he was from Millbrook. And then the swim meet at that carnival was held over at Dietrich's Lake. And I was interested to see that the two guys who kept winning everything were the Mackenzie boys. Now, these were not the Mackenzie boys that the Rotunos told us about in May, who were devils. Really nice, but devils. This would have been a generation back. Igor, who was a doctor to many of you probably, and Gilbert. But they were great swimmers. I understand, Gordon, that was one of your likes, swimming.
Gilbert?
Did you swim too, as well?
Oh, yes, yeah.
Well, your father and your Uncle Gilbert were also good swimmers.
I don't know, they might have.
About this time, they had 200 members, and they were doing so well that someone, turned out to be Samuel Thorne, offered $20,000 if the town could raise another $20,000 to match it. And they immediately got things going by having a big meeting at the Thorne building. They picked 5 teams, and 5 teams were going to have 5 days to go out and raise $20,000. Now,
In real money.
they showed the gifts of the team captains, and they were only $10 and $5 each, so you couldn't expect them to find much else out there. The team captains were George Ball. Did Helen get here tonight?
No.
It would have been her husband's uncle. E.A. Birch, must be my great uncle. Dan's great uncle. A.E. Wheeler. Any Wheeler descendants? Now I know we have a descendant of R. McLaughlin. This Mary Murphy.
Yes.
Was that Robert, or what's the R's name?
Rod.
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 And he was your
Uncle.
Your uncle.
Rod, yeah.
You remember him talking about the Y at all?
Oh, yes. I lived with him, and Uncle Nat. And yes, he used to referee, and I don't know, he used to referee basketball, I think.
Oh.
But I think that's baseball. Yeah.
Oh, it's a big part of his life.
Yeah, he loved that. He loved Melbourne.
And that's very good. And again, we come to Harry Downing, and we don't have any descendants, but we start with Edgar Downing, I assume with his son, had the orchard. Well, they had a big send-off night. 115 people at the Millbrook Inn, and Dr. David McKenzie and School Superintendent William Anderson proposed, let's go ahead with this. Now, I was amazed that William Anderson was the school superintendent way back then. He must have been around here for about 40 years. And so the team went out the next morning. They covered 400, they canvassed 400 people. And I wonder about that clock, which I had here, because they had to, I'm sure they started out 20,000, but they had 20,000 to go. And they were canvassing 400 people. And when I started adding up all the figures, I figured they only got $4,000. Now this must have been a little discouraging when they knew they had how that 20,000 to go. But it turns out in the Poughkeepsie newspaper, I discovered where the rest of the money came from. Oakley Thorne gave 5,000. At least two, David, how many Whites were there? It says Mrs. Whites. Two White sisters gave $5,000. H. Harkness Flagler, $1,000, and $500 from Robert Burton and Catherine Lamont. So that brought it up a little bit, but they ended up with $16,000, and they were still short. And once again, they met at the Thorne building for a big meeting. 7 o'clock in the evening, they told these captains, "You're $4,000 short. You've got 2 hours to go out." So they sent them out on the street again. And you can think, they weren't going to make $4,000. But in 5 days, make $4,000. They came back to a couple hundred, at which point Mr. Thorne, as I went over the history, really was an angel. He stuck behind the YMCA over the years, and Mr. Thorne stood up, and his Toastmaster made the announcement that Mrs. Daniel Lamont was giving $4,000. And that took it over, and I'm sure that must have been a very, very happy group. And then he announced that Samuel Thorne was giving another, besides the first $20,000, he was giving $50,000 as an endowment fund. And that was really, really big stuff. Came from his sister. If any of you heard of Phoebe Thorne, when she died, she left him some money, and he said he was doing what she would probably wanted to do with it. And so the building started. A couple of things here from the newspaper. That winter, 1913, January, newspaper. We have been asked by some of our New York subscribers about the YMCA. The lot is 215 feet by 200 feet. The house, occupied by Michael Fitzpatrick, was bought for $3,500. Another bunch of money. 40 feet of a lot was bought from Silas Hart for $1,600. And then in July, R.P. Stanton has the contract to dig the cellar for the new YMCA building. He started the work on Tuesday morning. And it was a whole year later before they announced that by the middle of June, the building would be turned over. Reed and Taft, the contractors, with Mr. Booth in charge. Does anyone here know about the Booth family? Anything about the Booth family?
Roy Booth?
Just said Mr. Booth. So I know there were some Booths during World War II.
Roy
Booth?
Yeah. I didn't know
And then his father was Fred.
I saw something.
The carpenter. Roy Booth's father was a carpenter.
And he was working on the Y. I'm just going to mention some other names of those people who were directors, besides the few that have been mentioned. Well, this points out that at their first meeting, Dr. David McKenzie was chosen president. I think I mentioned he stayed through all the whole time. Oakley Thorne, James Reardon, J. Haight, Edmund Coffin, DeGarris, Cornelius Reardon, the Pingrys, the Smiths, Duncan, Isley, Vincent, Albert Birch, George Ball, Anthony Briggs, John Dixon, and Cindy Benham. Before I jump to the next decade, because they got started and were going well, does anyone know anything about those 10 years between 1910 and 1920 that they'd like to add? Anything they've heard? I'll start on 1920 then to 1930. This is in the newspaper, and the reason, David, I was asking you the height of the ceilings in there, you figure it's about 25 up to the girder. In November 12, 1920, the YMCA team journeyed to Lakeville on Friday last and was overwhelmingly defeated by the score, 55 to 22. The Millbrook team had plenty of shots, but not being used to a 10-foot ceiling, most of the shots hit the ceiling before reaching the basket.
They used to do it here.
Used to do it here? You'd hit the girders, or did they have low ceilings?
What was girders?
Oh, they go over. Sure, we missed the balcony.
Yeah, I'm sure the shots in the corner when the balcony was there were tough. It was very tough.
Oh, that's right. Oh, yeah. Now, one of the things that's going to be in Louise's book is an article she wrote about the big Halloween party. It wasn't just baseball games, but the Halloween party held in 1929. And there are good people here. Miss Mabel Warren, a recent graduate of Sargent School for Physical Education, had been hired, and C.N. Smith was the new director. I don't know anything about him. But the committee chosen to judge Acosta was Mrs. Melvin Doyle, Henry Wicker, and Percy Haynes. Those names mean anything to you?
Mabel Warren.
Mabel Warren?
She was a gym teacher.
Henry Wicker was still Wicker's father.
Was she a gym teacher at the school as well?
Yes.
Yes.
Primary school.
Grammar school.
Grammar school.
Haynes
Open
was
restaurant down
probably,
on Poughkeepsie.
Haynes was probably connected to the lower drugstore.
The lower George.
Pleasant Valley, she had that big restaurant there.
Yep, on the corner. Well, was it A&B there now?
Yes.
Matter of fact,
Miss Talbot? Talbot.
Talbot's restaurant
Fishnet.
down in
Oh.
Pleasant Valley. And she was down there for what, 15, 20 years, and then the darn thing burned down and she was out of business.
Okay,
And before that, though, they had the fish down on, where's the fishnet?
Yep.
Down in Lower Main Street
all the way down Lower Main Street.
in Poughkeepsie.
Yep.
Mabel Talbot.
The prize winner, Miss Cora Gallupo, Vincent Weatherill, the prize for the funniest costume, and Mrs. Harold Vincent, the most original. A vast amount of amusement was caused by the pumpkin eating contest between Mike Gallupo and Raymond Benza.
That's pumpkin pie.
Pumpkin pie? What did I say?
You just said pumpkin.
Pumpkin pie eating contest. Yes, that's it. Raymond won by a close margin of one large pumpkin. Says. Now I've lost my place. Forgive me for a moment. There was a big argument about baseball on Sundays. Reverend Lyle wrote in, long letter, he was afraid we were giving in to the Bolsheviks by having baseball on Sunday. So Oakley Thorne wrote a long letter answering him. Amongst other things, he said he really didn't think we were giving in to the Bolsheviks, that letting the young men who only had Sunday off play on Sunday was really going to help them have no interest whatsoever. So that went ahead. And that was 1920. It was also the year, apparently, that the school first approached the Y and asked to be able to use the facilities. It says P.H. Keeper and Tom Vincent were on the school board. And that was the time that the tonsil clinic took place. Eleanor Sutherland told me that she came to the tonsil clinic as Eleanor Briggs, she was then. Upstairs at the one end, Dr. Mackenzie was there giving the young people ether. They take 8 at a time, she said. And the surgeon from Poughkeepsie was at the other end, took out their tonsils, they had cots, and they slept the night. Apparently they all made it all right, because they had 2 that year, 2 tonsil clinics that year. And it's also when they started what they called the twilight teams, the 4 twilight teams. I'm sorry, Bill Hammond isn't here tonight, because the Millionaires were playing then on the Y grounds. And I know Bill's dad, Andrew Hammond, was one of the players. Now I'm talking about the 1920s to the 30s. Now, is there anyone here who admits to being around then, who remembers what was going on? No, I've got to go up and look for. Oh, Sally? I saw. No, I was here.
I know she was here.
What do you want to know?
I want to see if there are any memories from that time period. If the Rattalos were here, they'd give us some, because I talked to Catherine Rattalo the other day. She said their house, as many of you may know, on the corner of Maple and Elm. And the tennis courts were built across from them, and they started playing tennis. Their dad became very interested, and he would tell them what they were doing wrong. And she said, can you imagine? She said, and a man who grew up in Italy is over here telling us how to play tennis. And apparently, he kept right after them. And he not only that, but he knew when they would get home from work, this was when they were working, and he'd get out there and make sure he saved the court for them. So he didn't get them to do as well as the Williams sisters, but he apparently was out there trying. So Catherine and Madeline got on the tennis team. Nikki, the sisters, Nikki and Charlotte, were on the and their Aunt Lucy Belletri, were on the bowling teams. Apparently they're very popular, and they traveled around the county. Had a great time. Catherine also said her boss, Tom Vincent, she worked in the pharmacy, because that would be, right? Wanted to learn how to play tennis. I think I saw his name on the men's bowling league, but he wanted to learn how to play tennis and asked Catherine, who worked there, if she would teach him. And when they went out, she would go. He would tell his other people working there that he was leaving to go do a little real estate looking and meet her, and she taught him how to play tennis. I'm just coming close to the end now. 1933, I haven't been able to figure out from the newspaper, was when the Y was turned over to a corporation called the Millbrook, right here, the Millbrook Community Center Corporation. I think Paul J. paid George T. Whalen was the treasurer, Jane Asbury the secretary, Thomas Foley and Clark Hicks were members of the committee, and William Kane, I'm sure some of you remember, was accepted the position as director of activities. Does anyone know how long Bill Kane was director?
Forever.
Forever.
Forever. I looked as I came in, I expect to see him in the office.
Well, I do have a couple of, I know he was still there in the 40s because I have a couple of columns to read, but one of the things they instituted, and I'm hoping some of you went to this, it said that in order to raise some money, they decided to have the basketball home games on Sunday afternoons. They're going to charge $0.25 apiece. Come in, they're going to have a girls' team and a boys' team. Now, did anyone go?
Yeah.
Gordon, you did.
Yeah.
Did the girls' team get as much interest as the boys' team?
No.
No, I wouldn't figure. Okay.
Yeah, long skirts on.
Diane?
It wasn't here, but it was in Elmira. My mother played women's basketball, and she said their church basketball had a bigger crowd than the men's.
Well, I played basketball.
Mary?
Yeah, I played basketball.
Oh, you played. Were you on a team or you played
On a team, yeah, we're a high school. A high school team.
And you played at the school?
I didn't play on Sunday afternoon, but it was the high school team. Yeah, we have it on Fridays, Friday nights we play. We played all different schools in the county.
You must have had a pretty good turnout, didn't you?
We did.
All right, all the high school parents. Parents.
All there, yeah.
Most of the basketball games are on Friday night.
Friday night.
As a matter of fact, Jeannie, you talked about the girls' basketball, and Helen Ball, for example, she was on the basketball team. She still talks about it.
And Claudia.
And Claudia was very, very good.
Card, Glupo was.
Yeah, Garupo, she was talking about that whole group there.
There's a picture of the girls basketball team. We don't have a date on it, Jimmy, I don't think, but, and who gave this to me was, I think James Flanagan. But it has Claudia Patron. It has, Galupo, Margaret Keever, Miss Mabel Warren is the coach. Claudia Patron, Mary Hart, Eileen Butler, and Anna Moore. But they're all nicely lined up for a team picture.
So besides going to the basketball games, what about the baseball games that were going on? Do any of you fellows remember going to them or playing with them? Yeah.
I remember late 40s, we lived over in a big white house on Elm Drive. And we used to sit on our front lawn and watch I think it was American Legion, maybe? Or Twilight Legion. Anyway, some guy hit a long fly ball to right field. And people used to park their cars all along Elm Drive. And that ball came right down, and there was an older car with a two-piece windshield. Hit that windshield right in the middle and broke both sides. What a coincidence. I think it was Marcy. I think it belonged to Marcy down there.
See, our house, Dan's house is up here on Maple Avenue. And so of course, marching game. No problem.
How long were you there in that house?
So we moved that house. My father moved that. He bought it from Harry Hart and Steiger. He was going to tear it down. It belonged to the Garrisons.
Yes.
And he was going to tear it down because it shaded the library. Dad bought it, jacked it up, moved it this way, and then moved it back onto a foundation which he designed as his office. And I've got the movies of that. You can see that thing sliding very quietly.
And you lived in that wonderful house. Now, were you still at an age? Is that the house you're talking about? You knew how to climb to the top, or was it the other
We're
one?
making over here.
When did you move?
Well, that was about 1942. I took some pictures of it. No, it was before we ended it. Oh, before we ended it.
Before that.
No, 41. Yeah, someone.
Maybe when you come back through next spring, bring some of those videos, and we can have a Mackenzie video.
Oh, everybody in town, all the firemen's parades will recognize everything.
That would be fun. Just going to read a couple other things. When the war came, Bill King was writing a column, some of you may remember it in the Round Table, Comment from the Center. And he mentions a couple of things. Time was when you wouldn't see 4 soldiers in Millbrook in 4 years. Now it's not unusual to see them in groups of 4. Quartet at home at this writing are Staff Sergeant Hickory Galli, Corporal Crystal Sotero, Corporal Rabbit O'Brien, and First Class Private Seabiscuit Seppi. All sound like baseball nicknames.
Jack O'Brien's Rabbit O'Brien.
I didn't know if you knew Jack.
Yeah, oh yeah. They call him Rabbit.
Rabbit.
He had beautiful red hair.
Shirley tried to convince him to come tonight and talk.
Oh.
Because he said he was the janitor here for 2 years before he joined the service.
It would have been nice to have him. And then, we mentioned in our main meeting the fact that at the beginning of the war, a lot of troops were moving through town and they bivouacked at the Oakley Thorn.
December 6th.
When was
December
it?
6th.
December 6th, that very...
Yep.
They threw out the dresses.
They were all, the whole thing, the commanding officer, OT asked the commanding officer, offered him a bed. He said, no, I'll sleep out with my men.
I lived on Thornville at the time. My father said, "You're not going out of this house."
I guess that they were hundreds.
Yeah, that was right down the Thorndale.
Yeah, they were. You should have seen the diner that night.
Oh, I did. Well, he mentions that people in the town taxied back and forth from bivouac to village, were taken into homes, they welcomed the public library, and at the Millbrook Community Center, they particularly appreciated being able to take showers. It was impossible to heat water as fast as they used it, and it rather hurt inside when after taking a lukewarm shower, they would say, "Gee, mister, thanks for the hot water and everything. This is a swell little town." There's something else that was going on, which is indeed a community center, because he mentions that he'd been asked to speak about the fact that the community center was having a meeting next Monday evening for the purpose of organizing a civil defense unit. The thought occurs it'd be well for all able-bodied men to attend Monday's meeting. Has he been gone? Is he still around? I would have loved to have met him. I've read so many of his things. What was he? Bill King.
Oh, Bill.
Long gone. We still have his newspaper writings.
Eddie King, his daughter was in our class, who graduated in 1947, and Bill King Jr. was in class of 51. So where's Bill?
And the oldest girl was in our class.
And was he a physical education teacher as well?
Does anyone know, besides being director of the Y, was he a phys ed teacher?
During the war, I think he was. I think he didn't have a degree, but when the war was on, he coached, he came in and taught phys ed, if I remember correctly. I could be wrong, but if I remember that. I arrived in Millbrook in 52, so.
During the war years, I know the school kept coming down here. Does anyone remember that the the community center itself still held separate programs? Yes. What kind of things? Marion, you would know.
There you go. Because you were back then in the 40s, I can't. Thanks a lot.
Did they have evening things? Did they still have bowling, for instance? I don't know how long the bowling was.
The bowling continued into the 50s until...
Boy Scouts were upstairs.
And women's league bowling too.
Downstairs. Until the... And I don't know when the Mansfield bowling alley opened, but we bowled downstairs. And gym classes continued here. Well, the high school were until the high school building.
Yeah.
And then elementary, I taught elementary phys ed here for years until all of a sudden the school system owned it at that point. And they decided we didn't need it anymore. And now they're back using it. But when I taught gym here for the little children, we bowled. That was part of the program. They did all.
Wait, it must have been, what, late 50s or early 60s Washington Lanes was built?
Yes.
Because I don't know who the director of the community center was at the time, but he was the paid director. I think it was a Safari.
Dash Safari.
Dash Safari?
Yeah.
Dash Safari followed after
Bill Kane.
Bill Kane.
Yes.
Dash
Well,
Safari
he left the employment of the community center to go and run Washington Lanes.
That's right. And then Dave came in as director after Dash left.
That's right. 61, Betty?
Yeah, it had to be in the 60s.
62.
I remember.
Well, I have come to the end of my information. And David? I'll take this one.
I'd like to thank Jenny very much. She did a lot of work in researching and looking over all this information, and I just find it very fascinating to know from working in the town all these years. It's just it's great. It's a great history, and it's nice that we're going over. What I'd like to do is tell you a little bit about what we've been doing since 1981. From 1933, as Ginny had said, when it turned into from a YMCA program to a community center. It was a not-for-profit group until 1981. In 1981 is when the recreation took over a lot of the programming, recreation things, and running programs in this building. We've been doing a lot of children's programs through the years since 1981. There's been some part-time directors like Pat Tellerday. There was Duffy White in the 70s. There was Jack Barnella was involved. I don't know if he ever was on a paid basis. There was Mike Murphy. A lot of great people before through the 80s. David Gerton, who I'd like to point out, the gymnasium inside here is named the village board when they redid this building after the village bought it from the school. I think it was about 85 or 86. The village board voted to dedicate the gymnasium to both Betty and David Gerton for all their years of recreation help in this community. And there's a nice plaque inside. I would like to call on Betty that we have a picture of David up there. He was very involved for years, was instrumental in starting the swim team in this community, and was the coach for many years. Betty, if you would talk about that a little bit.
Well, the swim team started in the summer at the town Washington pool, and we held it. It went summer after summer. I think Jim Flanagan actually was a lifeguard when it first started, and he did it for a couple of years, and then Dave took over. And Winnie Donato's up there.
Yeah.
He was on the team. All our children swam on the team. And then in '67, Jack Kennedy, a great swimmer in Poughkeepsie, came up to Dave and said, "We need another team for the winter. Why don't you bring your team out?" And we didn't practice at all, but we joined the league. And it was called the Mid-Hudson League at that point. And they swam. And then we started practicing at the YW in Poughkeepsie. And we practiced every week. And then after Dave passed away, I took over the team, and that was in 1969. Mickey Sotero helped me, or did it for a few years. Then when Mickey was giving it up, I took over, and I coached it to 88.
Yes, and it's still going strong.
And the team is still going, which is nice to see that it's been going all that time, and it still has the same. It's mainly for the children to enjoy themselves and get to be swimmers, and I always felt it was a very big safety measure.
Now, when David ran not only the swim team, Betty, he ran other programs here in the center on
He ran
Saturday.
other programs here at the Y. He used to have programs in the winter and on Saturdays, because he taught here the rest of the time and coached. And he also had summer programs. And matter of fact, you might be interested, I don't know, I have an article that was written in the Poughkeepsie Journal after Dave died. And it was written by young Paul Hurley, when he was the sports director in there. And it's about how when he was a kid, he'd come down and take off his galoshes down to the basement and rush up the stairs to see if he could get on the team. And and so forth. I'll be glad to give you a copy of that.
Love to have
If
it.
you would like to
And that's
have
one
it.
of the things that we'd like to try to do, as Ginny had said earlier, try to put together. Please, if you're going through your attics and your houses and things, please feel free to share that with us.
He even had a little, excuse me, David.
Yep.
He even had a little golf course out there by where the tennis courts are.
On
And
Hawaii.
then when the tennis courts started going down, they had ice skating out there.
No, I remember that as a youth, ice skating
Yes,
on
the way used to flood it, and they skated there, and that was part of the
Yeah.
program. They did that in 67, 89, I know.
Now, when I was a youth here in the 80s, I know the school had owned this building, and it was through the, I guess, early 80s, maybe late 70s, early 80s, the school owned the building, and it was not a community center, and the community center board was not particularly active. Is
They
that-
were active, but they used the building for their programs,
Mhm.
but the community center no longer could support the building with the heat and everything, and so they sold it to the school board. So I think practically nothing. I think they gave it to them for $1. And,
That's true.
and they, you know, that was why. And we still held program, which what is that here?
And they still do today. Elm Drive does come over here.
They come over, they still come over. But there was one time, and I don't know the time frame, that they didn't use it at all. And then they sold it to the village for $1.
And then in 80, I think it was 86, when they did a lot
You
of
bet.
fixing up in here, for sure. Helen, how about you? We've talked before. Jay?
Yeah,
You have pictures.
yeah. I think it was like in the late 70s, because some of these pictures up here, this is like, I'm maybe 10 years old, so we're talking early 70s here when we opened for basketball in the morning. This was not really an organized thing. It just whoever wanted to play showed up on a Saturday morning and you just, pick teams and play. But I think that was somewhere around the middle to late 70s is when it wasn't being used at all. Because I remember later on, we kind of gave notice to, we were playing basketball as kids, and later on we got to be pretty good, and we had a good team when we were seniors. And we said, I think playing, as a kid really made a difference. And I think you see the same thing now with this being open. They just see that turnaround.
Yeah. That was, late. It was still active and through the 60s, and that seems like a big gap when it was in the school's hands, I guess. I had even heard that they used it for
They used it for
storage.
storage. It was a shame.
Yeah, it was.
How about some other memories? I hear sometimes in passing people say, oh, they went to kindergarten in this room and went in first grade upstairs. And I'm always curious to know how that was done. I mean, were there different walls here? Was it actually a classroom? Who attended school in this building?
This was an art class when I was in elementary school. This was art class.
And when excuse me, go ahead.
No, that's it. That's all.
The first year I came in '52, I taught kindergarten upstairs. And it had been taught up there a couple of years before that. And we had 2 kindergartens, so sliding glass door, wooden door that we used to close.
Wasn't this your room where you had your kindergarten?
They had them here, but we also had it upstairs.
Yeah, because I remember my daughter started kindergarten in here and you were her teacher.
Okay.
She walked in, I thought, oh, it's going to have a terrible time leaving her. And you had the books all lined up over there. She's seen the books.
That was it.
No crying or fussing. She was a bookworm.
That time we had classes here, and then the Knights of Columbus building was across the street. We had the first grade over there.
Yeah.
And then I guess second and third grade were still in the old grammar school. Or no, that's the second, third, fourth grade.
Yeah, the town hall had first and second. And
Yeah,
then,
first and second.
and the old elementary school was 4th, 5th, and 6th, right over here.
Bob, I want to mention one other thing that we used to have here, and I credit Reva, Coach Reva, who came the first year. I think the first year he was here, he brought us weightlifting and all that stuff. And my son today, Donald, 40 years old, still making muscles and making shit. and it was all through Coach Reva, and I think there must have been about 10 or 15 kids that all met downstairs, and that place went dry and singing and doing all that exercise. And then they told him he had to get everything out of it. So I said, well, Coach, bring it up to my house. You can use my basement, because I have a great big basement. So up there they all came, and they used that for a while. And I forget where they moved
Well, I
to.
think they went to the Thorn building after that, but
Yeah,
happy to
Thorn
report,
building,
John,
huh?
that stuff is back downstairs now. It's
They're still building
Yeah, it's right actually in the bowling alley, and we do want to allow everybody to take a look around. I want to take some people downstairs and some of our other rec commission members. Upstairs is the courtroom. Now Judge Prisco is here, but the courtroom is upstairs. My recreation desk is upstairs. The zoning enforcement officer is up there. The police department. It's a very crowded building now. The mayor's office and the village clerk's office is there. But if you haven't been down or upstairs in a long time, or downstairs to see the bowling alleys or the old locker rooms, that kind of thing, we'd like to do that in a few minutes. Show you downstairs. And Danny Riva is someone who is still, I just think he's a Pied Piper, Jay would say. Greg, I know was here before. Danny Riva is a Pied Piper when it comes to teenagers and children in this community, and he's been an asset ever since he started teaching, which was...
Didn't Boy Scouts?
In the 80s, I think, yeah.
Didn't the Boy Scouts be here for many years?
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, when
And
those-
Canvas was the Girl Scout master.
What years did you
Yeah,
talk about?
it's there.
70s?
There's a years and
Was
years.
that the 70s and 80s?
Oh, that was back in the 30s.
30s?
30s, yeah. Mac McCandless was the scout master.
And the Girl Scouts and the Boy Scouts?
Girl Scouts, yeah, because I was a Girl Scout leader.
There's a story, and one of the things that we read that Jenny showed me about the expandable walls upstairs that it closed off. It was a banquet hall, but there was a description of when it was built. And it describes that it was a banquet hall that had collapsible walls, I guess, that could section off the room upstairs, and it's exactly, that's what it does.
They were very architecturally beautiful, really. They were not just folding doors. What you see up there is a corruption as far as folding doors go. But there were windows between, up across to create, to take the configuration of the ceiling. And there were 3 different doors so that you had access to that room. And I was decrying the fact that those beautiful doors were taken down during this quote-unquote fixing up.
Oh, is that when it happened?
That was not a fixing up, it was a destruction. Architecturally speaking. And somebody told me they know where those doors are, but anybody that appreciates good woodwork and joiner work and architecture would fall in love with them.
I don't have a memory of them.
Absolutely beautiful.
Frank, the windows are still there. The windows are still there. I just noticed them tonight.
Right.
They're beautiful.
They were gorgeous. The door, and they, somebody said the doors used to stick, probably that one time, Betty, but, you know.
They were big panels.
They were.
We used to close it so we could have 2 kindergartens.
Exactly, and along that same line, at the time the village was taking this over, there were 2 proposals to turn this building into apartments. And for some reason or other, thankfully, it died. There was another instance. I don't know how many of you remember Scarperi, the architect.
Yeah.
And there was a proposal to beautify the facade. And what a corruption that was. I mean, it was at a time when everybody was getting into aluminum and stainless steel, and I think that's the tendency he had. And so several people wrote letters, very pointed letters to him, in the fact that he was an architect and he should appreciate good Palladian architecture.
The memory of those doors brings up the fact of which a lot of people comment to me, and people that come in, maybe they're here once a year or once every 10 years. I have a lot of people that comment to me up at the park and here, that people walk in. I haven't been back in Millbrook in 20 years. And they like to show they like to see their school, where they went to school, and they like to go up to the town pool, known as Hydrick's Lake, and come here. And the number of people that comment, where'd the balcony go?
Yeah.
In the gym. And there's pictures, there's a couple pictures of the balcony that I don't even remember. Jay, you remember?
I remember.
But it wasn't.
We never had access to the balcony though, and whenever we'd knock a ball up there, I remember we'd open up this door and somebody climb on the door and then climb up onto the railing, just to retrieve the basketball. But yeah, we remember it, but.
Do you remember anybody slide? They used to get a rope out here for climbing. Years ago, we had a gymnastic exhibition.
Yeah.
And I can remember we'd stand up on the balcony and grab that rope and go sailing across this thing. It was a wild gymnastics. And people paid.
I think, excuse me, I remember that balcony went all the way around there in 1949 and 50 and 50 and 51, we had championship basketball teams. And that balcony up there would be packed. I'm sure it was overloaded. But it was a close game. Everybody was starting to tap their feet. You could hear that all over Millbrook, I'm sure. But I think that's probably one of the reasons they took it out of there, because that thing was built like a tank. I don't see how it could be not safe.
Did you ever know there was a circus in here with elephants?
You never knew that.
There were small elephants. No. I held a circus in here years ago. They had to build a ramp to get the elephants up on that floor.
Wow. Well, that was
Probably
probably
the donkey basketball in here.
Now, back in the 40s and 50s and 60s, now even kids think that is a very small gymnasium, but that was a decent size or a big gymnasium back then. Yeah. Which I find funny. Please, any other comments or stories that you'd like to share or anything?
Before I go, Dave, just a little bit about Little League, which is, I know you're near and dear to your heart.
Sure.
And I think it was 1970. Just prior to that, we used to play against Clinton Corners in Stanfordville, and we had that 3-town. And as it turned out, Millbrook had 3 teams, but there was a lot of kids that weren't participating because there was only so many kids that you could have on each team, but those teams were getting so big that it was just unmanageable. And I think it was 1970. My father was on the community center as well as I don't know, president of Little League, but it was in the 1970s when they decided to make the town team.
Yes.
And then they started off with 8 teams, and that's a bunch of them there, Breesville and...
Yeah. And there's another parade picture. Right, in about, I think you're right, Jay.
Yeah, I think it was 70. I was 10 or 11, something like that.
Yes.
I also remember during the winter time when we had gym classes down here. The principal, or Mr. Gregory, secretary, recruiting people from study hall to shovel snow. To shovel the sidewalk down to the
That was your physical education class, right?
Also detention.
Dave, I just wanted to say, when we moved to Millbrook in the early 70s, Betty, you used to take the swim team to the Kent School or someplace in Lakeville? Hotchkiss School. Yeah.
So we practiced a lot of different places, the Y, Hotchkiss, and the new...
Now it's at Maris,
Maris.
isn't it? Yeah. But the guy wasn't way before Maris was even built. Yeah.
Yes, that's what
He grew up to the Hotchkiss
And they were
School.
very good. Hotchkiss was very good for having us go.
But the Saturday, we talked about the Saturday basketball program, and now we have one going on that was started again in 1990, and we started in 1990 with 36 kids, and now last year I think we had 151.
Wow.
And to see the activity of this building on a Saturday in the wintertime is just mind-boggling to see the number of people that come through and enjoy it. Yes, sir.
In the late 30s, my sister played basketball at Arlington High School. And Arlington High School and Millbrook were in the same league at that time.
Yes.
Of course, Arlington had gotten so big.
Yeah.
And I used to play junior varsity on high school, and my sister and I have both played here. We used to play Millbrook, and back in those days, Millbrook used to beat Arlington. I mean, they had a bunch of good players up there.
Now, did girls' basketball at the time was the half-court basketball?
Yes.
Dad played either offense or...
Yes, it was. They had...
Half-court didn't come back until after World War I.
They had 3 forwards and 3 guards. And the guards never were able to make a basket because they
didn't want the ladies to sweat. Anybody else in comments? I appreciate the comments and...
Oh, I was going to say something. I used to live with my brother and we lived over on Elm Drive in the big white house. And I used to come over here on Saturday afternoons to roller skate in the gym because there was no basketball going on. I had just gotten a pair of brand new Chicago roller skates and I had practice. And I'd come over here and roller skate in the gym. But it was a little tricky because being that the floor was varnished, it was a little slippery. I had to be very careful.
Now, did you sneak in? Was it
No, I didn't do that. I did that one time, but no, I got permission from whoever was in charge. Now, one time I did sneak in through a basement window because I was in gym class and I left my shoes there and I had no shoes to wear. So I had to come over and sneak in to look for them. But they weren't here. They were at the library. That's true.
Great. Any other stories that people would like to share?
I snuck in the window in the girls' locker room and go down and look for
At this time, I appreciate everyone coming out tonight, certainly, especially with the weather. And I'm glad we had this program. I do want to point out also that the village is in the midst of making decisions on the future of this building. If those of you don't know, there's a possibility that this building could turn back into a full-fledged community center, which the Recreation Commission and the town is hoping that's the case. It's in the village's hands, though, and the village is possibly planning on moving their offices up to the Thorn Building, which is up the way. So we're looking forward to that possibility, and that we certainly have a lot of things that go on in this building, but at times what can happen, as you saw tonight, we have different meetings going on. We have children's programs in there, and we have a meeting out here in the lobby, and sometimes it just doesn't mix. So there's that's a possibility, and we're looking forward to that. So I just wanted to point that out there. We do want at this time, if you have time, I'd invite people to tour the building. I'll start over there in the corner and go down maybe with Mr. McMillan. We'll go downstairs if anybody wants to see the locker rooms, the bowling alleys, and that kind of thing. If anybody would like to go upstairs, maybe you can follow Judge Prisco and Mr. Zbadowski upstairs. I think it's all open, but that's where the courtroom is now. The police office, I think, is open. I asked them to keep it open. The messy room down at the end is my responsibility, which is where I hide out, and a lot of storage of the recreation things are there. I also invite you, please, to take some refreshments home. Nice, the pastries were made by the Corner News Cafe down here on the corner. Donna Guerrero is the baker down there. So please grab a handful on your way out. Jenny, should I let you wrap up?
No, of course. Thank you very much.